I am so glad that Abdu Murray is with us tonight. He is a lawyer, grew up in Detroit, comes from a Muslim family, and searched for truth. And speaking of truth, finding meaning and clarity in a post-truth world, Abdu Murray. I understand you have 3 books with you tonight. They're over at the Ravi Zacharias booth, and people are sure welcome to go and talk to them and pick up the books. We are going to be blessed tonight. Every time we have someone from Ravi Zacharias Ministries, I'll tell you, they give us something to think about, and I'm so glad that you're here tonight, Abdu. God bless you. I just want to remind you that there will be children's ministry starting tomorrow morning, and we also have Abdu back with us tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. So I know that some of you will be shifting your plans once you hear him tonight. You'll be wanting to come back tomorrow morning. And so we just are so glad you're here. Come, would you, Brother Abdu? And they're going to find out that we are twins. Come up here and show them how we match. Okay?
Yeah.
We are brothers from a different mother. Right there. He's my bigger brother, actually. God bless you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
God bless you.
My pleasure. Thank you. Well, thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you so much for having me. It's, I'm coming off of a bit of a marathon, and what ends up happening in itinerant ministry is that you do these marathons, and then you're asked to sprint as soon as you're finished with the marathon. I just came back after 12 days in Asia. Literally got off the plane this afternoon, having been 12 days. I was in the Philippines for a series of meetings first, and then in Sri Lanka, in Colombo, where we had a pastor's conference. Louis Giglio was there, Ravi was there, I was there, a number of other people were there as well. And we did some recording for another book that we have coming out. So I'm a little jet laggy. I'm still on Sri Lankan time, and so for me it's like 9 o'clock in the morning. Back there. Actually, I think it's 10 o'clock in the morning. Tomorrow for me. So I'm a little bit of a time traveler today, so please bear with me a little bit as I get my bearings. But it is an honor and a blessing to be here. This is my second time on this stage, actually. I spoke at Church of the Rock a couple of years ago. RZIM had a human rights summit where we talked about the foundations of human rights down the road at the Human Rights Museum. And I was blessed to spend a Sunday morning here at Church of the Rock. So it's good to be back, very good to be back. Thank you so much for having me back. I want to speak today on seeing the sun, the S-O-N sun, through the fog of the cultural issues we're facing today. Now, I do that, and it's going to require a little bit of a thinking cap kind of exercise tonight. It's a Friday night. People are getting a little nervous that it is Friday, right? I'm right about that? Okay, it's not Saturday. And sometimes people want to sort of just get sort of coast into the weekend, but we're not going to do that today. We're going to rev it up quite a bit. Hope you can bear with that. But before I do, I was sitting there and listening to both the choir sing and the scriptural reading today, and I thought I'd give you a little bit of background on me. If you haven't seen my testimony online, it's a much longer version of this. I want to give you a 3-minute version of how I came to faith, because the scripture reading and the hymn, How Great Thou Art, just compels me to tell the story, if you don't mind. As has already been said, I was raised in a Muslim home. I was pretty serious about Islam growing up, and I was raised in the city, in the area of Detroit, and I was an apologist for Islam. I was an evangelist for Islam. I thought anybody who wasn't a Muslim was wrong, and I was right, and I made it my job to convince people of that. Now, I didn't do it in a sort of a Quran-thumping way. I wasn't sitting at the street corners with a sandwich board on my side saying, repent, become a Muslim, or die, or whatever. I wasn't doing that. But I was having conversations with people, and oftentimes Christians had no idea how to defend what it was they believed. I would ask them why they were a Christian, and 9 times out of 10 they'd tell me, I don't know, I was born that way, which is a weird thing to be as a Christian, to say you were born that way. Maybe born into a Christian home, but no one's actually born that way, as opposed to born again that way. But they had no idea how to respond to the objections I was raising. And oftentimes what I would raise is 3 objections. I would say, well, multiple objections, but 3 main categories. The Trinity makes no sense and is one of the silliest ideas anybody could believe. God could not become a man, And that man, if he was God, would never die on a cross. And the reason I would do that is because I thought all of these issues, Trinity, incarnation, and cross, insulted the greatness of God. Now, you've heard the phrase, I'm sure you've heard it, Allahu Akbar. You've heard Muslims say this, correct? And normally you hear this when it's on the news. And the reason why is because, the guys who have the bomb strapped to their chest or whatever say this and then they do something terrible. The reality is most Muslims say this phrase, Allahu Akbar, and they have no desire whatsoever to hurt anybody. None. Most Muslims you meet, by the way, are not sitting behind the stairwell at the airport twisting his mustaches, thinking of ways to blow the place up. Most of them are not doing that. There are, of course, the issues you see in the news, but most of them are not doing that. They say Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar literally means God is bigger, but the connotation is God is greater. The greatness of God is the central idea of all of Islam, and everything about Islam flows from this idea. And for me, worshiping God as the greatest possible being there could be, was the central goal of my life. And so when I would hear Christians talk about the Trinity, the incarnation, and the cross, I would sing, I'd say something like this: I hear you singing this hymn, How Great Thou Art. You want to change it to How Great Thou Aren't, because your God is not great. Because how could God be great if God the Father is God, and God the Son is God, and God the Holy Spirit is God? Why would God the Father, if he's great, need help from God the Son and God the Holy Spirit? Sounds like three gods to me. You sound like a confused tritheist. And most Christians had no response to what I was saying. And then this idea that the God of the universe, the God who is so powerful and so mighty and so majestic that he creates a universe that is billions and billions of light years across, but can also create infinitesimal subatomic particles. This is the same God that you guys believe in, that you say became trapped in a human body that sweat, bled, needed to eat, and eventually dies at the hands of the very sinners he creates? And you're telling me this God is great? And then I came to realize something. It took 9 years, and I'm going to share a little bit more of this tomorrow about why the journey took 9 years instead of 9 minutes. But I began to realize something, and with this I'm going to go into my own message here. The very ideas that I thought insulted God's greatness are the very ideas that demonstrate his greatness. And one of those, and I'll just bring it to a rapid close before I get into my message today, is that when you look at the idea, the conception of who God actually is in Christianity, you see a God who doesn't need help. You see a God who doesn't actually need anything, yet he gives abundantly to each one of us. You see, Allahu Akbar, Muslims say this because they believe that God is the greatest possible being. And we, Psalm 145, talk about his greatness being unsearchable. We agree with that. And if that's the case, then who makes better sense of this idea that God is truly great? Is it the Muslim who says that God is not triune, God is not incarnational, and is not self-sacrificial? Or is it the Christian who says that God is triune, that God is incarnational, and God is self-sacrificial? I remember where I was when I first read the words of Romans chapter 5, verse 8, having searched for 9 years to find the truth, and I saw that truth coalesce into one simple statement in the Bible. You see, if God is the greatest possible being, if Allahu Akbar, if God is the greatest possible being there is, then the greatest possible being would necessarily express the greatest possible ethic, and the greatest possible ethic is love. And if he's the greatest possible being, he would express the greatest possible ethic in the greatest possible way. And what is the greatest possible way to express love? It's self-sacrifice. So the God of the universe, the greatest possible being, must not only be capable of self-sacrifice, but he must be capable of self-sacrifice in the greatest possible way. And it's not to sacrifice yourself for those who love you. It is the sacrifice of yourself for those who hate you. Romans chapter 5, verse 8, for God demonstrates his love for us in that while we were yet sinners, those who hate God, Christ died for us, the greatest possible being, expressing the greatest possible ethic in the greatest possible way. And I was on a search for the God who was the greatest possible being, and he must be, and he in fact is, the God of the cross and empty tomb. I say that because one, I was sort of compelled to by the hymn that was sung so beautifully and the scriptures that were read so powerfully. But I also think it pertains to our topic today, seeing the sun through the fog of the confusion of culture today. How do we get at truth, especially when our theme is 2020 vision? It becomes very difficult to see the harvest through the fog because of all the cultural fog there is today. Whether it's competing religious systems like Islam or Hinduism or the New Age or whatever else that might be out on offer today, or it's the cultural questions we see today, we are very much sort of afloat at sea in the fog. It reminds me of a story. A number of years ago, it was told in the Navy, U.S. Navy is true. I'm not sure it's actually true. I think it's not, but the story pertains nonetheless. It's a story of this flotilla of U.S. naval ships that are crossing the North Atlantic on a very, very dark but very, very foggy evening decades ago. And as they're approaching, and they're coming from a easterly path coming west, they see a light in the distance, right in their path. And so the captain of the ship signals ahead and says, change your course 15 degrees to the south to avoid a collision. And the response is in a very informal way. It says, nope, you change. You move 15 degrees to the north to avoid a collision. And the captain is not going to be talked to this way. He says, this is the commander of the USS Abraham Lincoln. We direct you to change your course 15 degrees to the south to avoid a collision. Please confirm. And the voice comes back and says, nope, sorry, buddy, you got to move. And the captain's now upset. He's incensed. He says, this is the captain of the USS Abraham Lincoln. I'm the captain of the second largest ship in the North Atlantic fleet of the United States Navy. I'm accompanied by 5 destroyers and numerous support vessels. If you do not change your course 15 degrees, that's 15 degrees to the south to avoid a collision, countermeasures will be undertaken to ensure the safety of this vessel. Confirm. And the guy says, buddy, this is a lighthouse, your call. You know, it's interesting because you think of this story and you think of this lone guy sitting in this lighthouse and this flotilla of naval ships with all the guns you can possibly imagine and all the artillery and all the firearms and all the power, it seems, are coming towards this lone solid light in the middle of the fog. And they seem to have all the power, but the lighthouse keeper knows something, is that he's not floating in a sort of baseless way. He's anchored to the rock. He's anchored to the sure foundation, and he cannot be moved, no matter how many guns, no matter how big the ships are. If they come to the shore, they will crash, and they will all perish. You see, I think that we see the onslaught of culture coming our way, where there's so many changes coming. There's so many things that were once solid rock foundational issues that are now up for grabs. And we, sometimes as Christians, feel like we're holding up this small little candle in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the fog, and we think they have all the power. They're the ones, by the way, who are making the laws and legislation, or changing the culture, or changing the way things are done in public schools, whatever it might be. And here we are, this little tiny light, but they're all just afloat. If you're standing on a solid rock of foundation, you can't be moved. The question is, are we? I want you to think of the questions we're asking today about the things of life right now in our day. If you look around and you see the political scene, geopolitical scene all around the world, I hail from the Middle East and my family comes from there, and you think about what's going on in the Middle East and you ask yourself, who's fighting who exactly and who's mad at who? I follow it all the time and I don't even know who's fighting who and who's mad at who. Then you think about the questions our young people are being asked. In fact, they're asking us these questions as well. Like a simple question, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be human? Now, this seems like an obvious answer, but then again, is it so obvious now with a thing called the transhumanism movement? It's not nothing to do with gender identity issues. Transhumanism is simply the idea that human beings can modify themselves to become better than human. I don't mean through prosthetics or other devices that help people who have infirmities or who are injured or whatever to be able to walk, like prosthetics or whatever it might be. I'm talking about gene therapies that aren't meant to cure diseases, but gene therapies that can make short guys taller, bald guys hairier, and people who have fine sight see even further, or have brain recall, or whatever it might be. They're doing this. They're called biohackers. It's happening right now, where we're actually saying the idea of what it means to be human is completely malleable. We can be improved upon. It's happening now. But then the questions that arise as well, and these all have political ramifications, of course, as you know, is this: what does it mean to be male? What does it mean to be female? Are these categories even real in the first place? What does it mean to be married? What does it mean for life to begin? When does life begin exactly? And can we end life at a certain age if someone wants it to be ended of their own life, or if someone else thinks that you've outlived your usefulness? Can we make these decisions all on our own? These are questions we used to think we had solid answers to, and there was almost no debating about it. Today, all of them, every single one of them is up for grabs. Because we're living in a land of fog, a land of confusion. I recall years ago in the 1980s, and I'm a child of the 80s. Some of you are, but very few of you are children of the 80s, but some of you have children who are children of the 80s, I can see. And there was a song that was popular in the 80s called Land of Confusion. Now, this song was written in the midst of the Cold War, back when the United States and the USSR both were engaged in a Cold War. And a phenomenon that was happening at that time was called Cold War neurosis, or Cold War even psychosis in some instances, where children were waking up in the middle of the night screaming because they had had nightmares over and over again that the United States or the USSR, one of them had gone nuts and pushed the button and made the Cold War nuclear hot and irradiated everybody. And in the middle of all that chaos and confusion about who's going to win the Cold War, will the Cold War become a real war, all that stuff, this song was written. And the lyrics go like this: "Oh, Superman, where are you now? When everything's gone wrong somehow, these men of steel, these men of power are losing control by the hour." That song was written 30 years ago. It could be written today. Think of all the voices that tell you, I'll give you exactly what you want, exactly the way you want it, and you'll have whatever your heart's desire, and everything you like and all your preferences are yours for the taking, and we'll force it on other people if we have to. We're actually telling children now, you can decide who and what you are at the age of 8, and by the way, not only can you, but we're going to ensure that you do, and we'll chemically enhance it if we have to. Can you imagine? Some of you in this room, and I think many of us in this room, are always in a lifetime struggle to figure out who we are. Some of you have just figured it out. I'm 47 years old, and almost 47 years old. I'm still holding on to 46 with your life. But I'm just figuring it out myself, and you'll always be at an age of discovery. Now we're telling children, you can decide who you are. And by the way, when you decide that, whether it's academically, whether it's physically, whether it's psychologically, whatever it is, we're going to ensure it stays that way. Can you imagine the kind of pressure an 8, 9, or a 10-year-old kid feels when he hears that? And we had this land of confusion in the 80s because they were afraid his life was going to end. And now they're having this land of confusion. High anxiety levels. Studies are showing that the anxiety levels of children are as high as they've ever been, yet they are the most comfortable they've ever been because we're foisting on them decisions that will affect the rest of their lives, and they're not capable of making it, nor should we foist this on them because it is not our right to foist this on them, but here we are. Now, we seem to decry the confusion, but we also seem to love it at the same time. See, we love being awash floating on the water, it seems to me. And the question is why? I think one of the reasons why we like being in the fog is because fog creates confusion, and confusion creates no boundaries. There are no more borders anymore. There's no more bright line things like this is right and wrong, or this is what this is. The word is almost has no meaning anymore. And if there's no boundaries, then everything's fuzzy. And that means I can do, say, think, act, be, believe, whatever I want, whenever I want, in whatever way I possibly want. Which means that I have ultimate decision-making authority in every aspect of life. And so we embrace confusion. I want you to think about this for a moment, if you would, just for a moment. Think about these issues. If you're confused sexually, you're a hero. If you're confused morally, you're progressive. And if you're confused religiously, in other words, all paths lead to God, or all paths are equally valid, or equally invalid, kind of depends on how you look at it, well, you're considered tolerant. Did you see it? Sexual confusion is heroic. Moral confusion is progressive. Religious confusion is tolerant. But if you have clarity on these issues, if you're clear on sexual mores or sexual boundaries, you're bigoted. If you're clear on moral restrictions, you're regressive, you're a backwards kind of a person. And if you're clear on that maybe there is only one way to God and that God has provided evidence that there is that one way, well, that's considered intolerant. And so confusion has become a virtue and clarity has become a sin. But we're clear on one thing. We are clear on one thing. Whoever doesn't agree with me is Hitler. Now I want you to hear what I'm saying carefully. I'm not saying if you're neutral, you're okay. No, you have to agree with me. You can't be neutral. You can't say, you know what, I want to think about it a little more and weigh the evidence for myself. You can't do that because if you don't agree with me more than I agree with me, you're Hitler or Stalin or whoever it is. Pick your despot, that's who you're going to be. You see, we're in a polarized society now where we can no longer have measured opinions based on facts. We have to give full vent to our preferences. That's why in 2016, Oxford English Dictionaries named its word of the year, and the word of the year was post-truth. You see, every year Oxford names a word of the year, and usually towards the end. And in 2016, especially at the end of the US election cycle, the word was post-truth. Now, post-truth was coined as a phrase in 1992, I believe it was, but in 2016, the word was used, I think, 2,000 times more often than in the previous years combined. What does post-truth mean? A post-truth culture is a culture that elevates preferences and feelings above facts and truth. It's one that elevates feelings and preferences above facts and truth. Now, listen carefully to me, okay, because this is important. Because oftentimes the church is about 10 years behind the culture. We're responding to objections they had before, not the ones they have now. But a post-truth culture is not the same thing as a postmodern culture. We hear this word postmodernism all the time, and it's a valid word used to describe something. Postmodernism is the idea that there is no such thing as objective truth. Are you hearing what I'm saying? Postmodernism is the idea that there is no such thing as objective truth. Why did postmodernism rise? Because it was the philosophers and the thinkers and the cultural critics who said that truth claims, saying that my truth is the truth, leads to wars, leads to conflict, and it leads to the person who claims truth to try to foist his truth or her truth onto somebody else, and that ultimately results in conflict. And if we get rid of the category of truth altogether, and we say there's no truths, only perspectives, and only conversations we should be having, and not wars and these kind of things to fight over, then we'll eliminate all kinds of conflict, and we'll all be happy. So we'll eliminate the idea of truth altogether. So we'll say there is no such thing as an objective truth. But you can see the problem, can't you? Already you can see it. If I make the claim there is no such thing as truth, that statement itself has to be true. And if the statement is true, then the statement is actually false. And so my question is, why did you say it? In other words, you can take someone who's postmodern, who rejects the idea of truth, and you can reason with them because ultimately reason is what they're looking for, and they will eventually reason themselves out of a postmodern viewpoint, which is why it's almost dead. But from the ash heap of postmodernism's demise is post-truth rising up. You see, postmodernism says there is no such thing as truth. Post-truth says there is such a thing as truth, but I don't care. Because they elevate preferences and feelings over facts and truth. So they acknowledge that facts and truth exist, but it's sort of underneath the bed. We don't really bring it out unless we absolutely have to. We'd rather have our preferences and our feelings dictate what's right and what's wrong. How did we get here? How did we get to this point? I think there's a clear way we can see it. We have a struggle now for autonomy, not for freedom. You know, we use this in North America, whether it's in Canada or the US or other parts of the free world, so to speak. We have this word we love so much. We use freedom. It's in our songs, it's in our coinage, it's in our movies that we love, whether it's Braveheart or Amistad or The Patriot or anything Mel Gibson makes for some reason. This word freedom is so prevalent. But you know what's interesting is that we stopped talking about freedom a long time ago and replaced it with the word autonomy. We don't realize we're using autonomy. We think that autonomy and freedom are synonymous. Like if you're autonomous, you're free. Like autonomous vehicles, ones that can drive themselves and all that. That's not what it is. That's not it. The word autonomy is a fancy word that has two smaller words as its roots. Autos from the Greek, meaning self, and nomos, also from the Greek, meaning law. So when you are autonomous, you are a law unto yourself. There is no boundary above you. There is no moral law to which you need to conform. You are the arbiter of all things. You decide, based on your whims, what's true, what's right, what's wrong, and all these kind of things. And we consider that freedom. But is it really freedom? Is it? I want you to think about it for a moment. If we live in a post-truth culture where preferences and feelings matter more than facts and truth, and I'm autonomous, I'm a law unto myself, which means that my preferences dictate my law, and you're a law unto yourself. You're autonomous as well, which means that your preferences dictate your law. What ends up happening when my preferences and my law conflict with your laws? Truth no longer decides who's right and who's wrong because truth has been hidden under the bed. Feelings decide who's right and who's wrong, but my feelings and your feelings clash, and nothing is there to decide who's right and who's wrong, except for one thing. The thing that determines who's right, who's wrong, or who wins is not going to be truth, it's going to be power. That's exactly what we're seeing in our day today. And so someone has preferences that are not in favor anymore. And that person's preferences get right shuttled over and become criminalized. And those who have those criminalized viewpoints are no longer free. They're no longer autonomous. They end up enslaved. Isn't that ironic? That in our quest for unlimited freedom, someone ends up enslaved. We got this way, ladies and gentlemen, because of the human condition. It's not they. They aren't out to get us. We are out to get us. We, all of us, collectively as human beings. Think about the Garden of Eden story, the whole Garden of Eden story. Adam and Eve are placed in the Garden of Eden, and they have a purpose. And the purpose is not a mystery. It's not mysterious in the slightest bit why you and I are here. We are here for relationship with the divine. The Bible tells us that God walked and talked with Adam and Eve in the cool of the day. He interacted with them. It was their purpose to be with God, and they enjoyed that purpose for who knows how long. They were told simply, there's one fruit of one tree you cannot eat, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Do not eat of it, because the day you eat of it, you shall surely die. And then they lived with that rule, who knows how long, never tempted by it at all, never tempted once. But along comes Satan, and he says to them, did God really say? And he misquotes God. And then Eve misquotes God back, and now he's got them. He knows, I've got him and I've got her, because they have added to God's word, which means that they are not hiding it within their heart with all diligence. And he says, God knows in the day you eat of that tree, you will not die, but he knows you will become like him, knowing good and evil. And that's when it suddenly became desirous for food, because their purpose, the truth was, the fact was, they were meant to be with God, but their preference was to be God. And so their preference was elevated over the truth, and then they both imbibed that apple, or that whatever it was, that fruit, and they became the first post-truth people. The first post-truth people were the first people. The seeds for the post-truth culture were planted in the very first garden. And now it's grown into its own tree with its own fruit for us to imbibe in. The autonomy-seeking nature of humanity is its very nature, and it started from the beginning. And now it's become blossoming. It's become blossoming. And so what's happened, friends, is that we have sacrificed clarity and truth on the altar of human autonomy. We've sacrificed clarity and truth on the altar of human autonomy. And then what ends up happening, what you get from that, is the burnt offering on this false idol's altar. And the smoke that rises up chokes the very air out of freedom's lungs. How do you deal with a situation like this? It sounds doomy and gloomy. I realize that. Please forgive the doom and gloom on a Friday night. And it's going to sound a little bit worse in a minute. But I will tell you this. I'm actually an optimist. I really am an optimist. I really am. And you're going to get that today too. I think the way you deal with a post-truth culture, there's two ways to do it. And it's both different sides of the same coin. The first way is this. You have to expose the consequences of a post-truth mindset and how they don't work and how they lead ultimately to a slavery and to a society we do not want. And the second thing you have to do is offer the hope that truth actually brings. So once you show the consequences of post-truth, then you can offer the hope that truth brings, and then people will suddenly go from post-truth to being totally imbibing truth and understanding its beauty and its power. I can tell you this, ladies and gentlemen, I have been to college campuses all across the world. All across the world. This post-truth thing is not a Western thing, it's a global thing. But I've also seen the college campus arenas filled to capacity. Sometimes 10,000 of them come to line up and ask their question. And they ask their questions because they have engaged in the post-truth bender, and they have found out that it has not left them with answers, only a headache and a heartache, and now they want something other than the hair of the dog that bit them. I've seen it. It can happen. This is a missions festival. The backyard here in Winnipeg, all across Manitoba, all across Canada, is a mission field of thinking people, of influential people. Everyone's a thinker. Everyone is. And we can reach out to them. First, by exposing the consequences of post-truth thinking. There are a number of consequences of post-truth thinking. I'm only going to go through a couple of them because the time doesn't permit all of them. But the first casualty, the first thing that dies on the altar of our sacrifice of clarity for human autonomy is all sense of wisdom. All sense of wisdom dies. I was giving a talk, I was actually describing my conversion from Islam to Christ at a men's breakfast one day to a large group of men, and there was a guy in the front row who was taking copious notes as sort of an understatement, because like there was smoke coming from the page, so to speak. It was like, get the fire extinguisher, this guy's gonna light on fire when he's done. And usually this is the kind of person who speaks to you first after you're done speaking. You fold up your notes and you go down, and there's the guy ready to talk with you, which is what I like about this job. I really like that part. And sure enough, he talked to me immediately afterwards. And he said, I appreciate the way you talked about how you converted to Christianity without disagreeing with Islam. And I'm like, well, you didn't quite get the point. Because the reason why he said that was because whenever I give my testimony, you'll see that I didn't reject Islam because it was false. I became a Christian because this is true. By implication, all other things are false, but this was true and fundamentally true. And so I became that way. I became a Christian because of the truth and the power in the message. But he didn't see me as disagreeing with Islam, so he thought I was sort of agreeing with it. I said, well, you missed the point a little bit, but continue, please go ahead. He said, well, I want to show you something. And if you're a public speaker and someone says, I want to show you something, it's going to be a long discussion. And it was. It was a good one, though. He had a diagram. And what he did was, in the middle of this diagram, he drew a capital T, like scribbled very bold, and there was a circle around it. And he says, this represents the total absolute truth. And there is such a thing. I said, great, we're on the same page so far. He says, but none of us knows all of it. None of us, no matter what our religious system is, we don't know all of it. I said, so far, we're also on the same page. Because if I knew all the truth, then I would know everything. And if I knew everything, I'd be God. So we're off to a great start. I'm not God. So far, we agree. He says, but, and he had these little lowercase t's that were surrounding the big capital T, and there were arrows pointing towards it. He says, all of us have incomplete but equally valid versions of the truth. And we're trying to get to the ultimate truth. I said, all of us have equally valid versions of the truth? He said, yeah, all of us. I said, really? Hitler, Stalin, Pol Pot, Idi Amin, Mao Zedong, Genghis Khan, I can keep going. These men, you're telling me these people all had, Charles Manson, I can keep going on and on and on. These people all had equally valid, though incomplete versions of the truth? This is what he said. I'm not even kidding you. He said, I can tell you this, I don't prefer their version of the truth, but because my version is incomplete, I'm in no place to disagree with them. Like, buddy, if you want to disagree with somebody, Hitler's a safe bet. No one gets mad at you for that. And those who do get mad, it's okay. I said, wait a minute, are you telling me that you can't disagree with anybody? He said, that's right, I can't disagree with anybody. I said, sure you can. He said, no, I can't. I said, you just did it. I'm a trial lawyer. Here's my point. Here is a very, very well-read, very intelligent, sharp guy who is willing to sacrifice his God-given wisdom on the altar of his preferences because he preferred that there be no hard work involved in this discussion. I prefer that we just don't have this discussion about who's right and who's wrong. All paths lead to God in some way, shape, or form. We'll eventually get there. Let's not have these uncomfortable, conflicting discussions. Let's just get along. See, the problem with that is that he's not willing to put in the hard work, which means that he ultimately insults everyone's belief systems, even though he's trying to give them respect. Do you see the problem? When you've heard this phrase, of course, all paths lead to God. You've heard this phrase, right? And maybe you're someone who said it one time in your life. Maybe you say it now. Here's the issue. When someone says all paths lead to God, they sound very respectful. I don't want to disagree with anybody, so I sound very respectful. The problem is that when you say all paths lead to God, you're forgetting a simple truth. All paths don't even claim to lead to God. Buddhism is the idea that there is no self. There is an illusion of the self. All you are is an accretion of karma from previous lives, and the goal of human existence is to stop existing. To extinguish like a candle flame being snuffed out. That's your purpose. That does not sound even remotely close to Hinduism, which was the birth of Buddhism, was from Hinduism. Buddha rejected the Hindu idea of the self, and the Hindu idea of the self is that the self is divine. The self is God. You are God, and so am I. We're under the illusion of our separateness, but we have a self, and that self is one with the absolute. Buddhism rejects all of that. So how could you tell a Hindu and a Buddhist you basically believe the same thing? You're literally disrespecting all of their histories. So you're not being respectful in the slightest bit. You're not taking them seriously. You're not giving them what I call the dignity of difference. I respect people far too much, and I respect their belief systems far too much to just patently agree with them. I say, you know what? I respect your system of belief. I've studied it, and I will tell you that based on my studies of it, I respect you far too much to say we basically believe the same thing. I would do away with all your history if that was the case. Let's engage. Let's disagree agreeably. Can we do that? I think we can. You know, what I said had worked because I walked out to my car and there the guy was. He was saying, if I can't disagree with anybody, but I disagreed with him. He was doing that kind of a thing. So it was there. But this has societal implications as well. I'll give you an example of what I mean. A number of years ago, in 2015, in fact, it was, there was a protest at the University of Missouri. And the football team had put on the protest to protest against some racial injustices that were happening on campus. Now, it's a protest at a public university involving the football team. That's newsworthy and involving a public injustice, the scourge of racism. So naturally, the media shows up. And in fact, that's what you want to have happen. You want the media to show up at your protest because otherwise it's a bunch of people in a room complaining. They were outside in the public square, and the media showed up. ESPN sent a photojournalist to capture it because it's sports related. Now, there was these so-called safe spaces right in the middle of the protest area. A safe space being a place where kids could safely be there, vent, protest without any media attention, which is just bizarre by itself. But there you have it. Well, this journalist happened to unwittingly run afoul of one of these safe spaces and was taking photos, not interviewing anybody, just taking photos of the people who were protesting. And a woman jumps in front. You can see it on YouTube right now if you wanted to. A woman jumps in front of the journalist and is trying to obstruct his view and forcibly remove him from the premises. And then she finally gets sick of it and she says, I need some muscle over here. I need some muscle to help me remove this aggressor. Who's going to help me? Do you know what she does at the university? She teaches journalism as part of the communications department. She was violating that journalist's First Amendment U.S. constitutional right to freedom of the press at a public university. Can you get more confused? And I assume she's a very, very bright, very accomplished person. But all sense of wisdom goes out the window when you sacrifice clarity and truth on the altar of your preferences. It just leaves the building. That's consequence one. Consequence two, and there's several consequences more, but I think I have to race through them. Consequence two is that we will lose all sense of integrity. Consequence two is we lose all sense of integrity. Now, this is something the church needs to point a finger at itself. Let me go through this real quickly, and then we'll move on to the third one, and then we'll move on to the hope. When we lose our sense of integrity, it doesn't happen intentionally, often. I remember in 2015 when the United States Supreme Court ruled that same-sex marriage was the law of the land in the United States. I got all these emails and all these social media buzz things, pinging off of my stuff, saying, oh, well, now they've done it. Gay activists have sued Christian publishers in federal court to get the Bible banned as hate speech, using the U.S. Supreme Court decision as a precedent to get it banned as hate speech. And I was like, what? That can't be true. What? And I'm seeing all these people who claim to be Christians who are propagating this story as if it's true. So I did some research. It took me 3 minutes. 3 minutes. A commercial's break worth of time to find out it wasn't true. Yes, a gay man had sued 2 Christian publishers over the Bible in federal court. But he wasn't suing to get it banned as hate speech. He wanted it retranslated to be gay-affirming because he said that it should be gay-affirming and that the mistranslation, in his view, had caused him emotional damages, and he wanted emotional damages money. And he didn't file the case after Obergefell. He filed the case, the U.S. Supreme Court decision. He filed it 7 years before the decision, and it was dismissed within 30 days as frivolous. I know the judge who did it. And yet it was Christians who were saying, this is what's happening, they're tearing apart our country. We need to do better. If you claim to be a person who follows the way, the truth, and the life, then your way must be truthful and life-affirming and life-giving. If you click like, and all of us are guilty of this, if you click like or share or whatever it is through your social media accounts or whatever it might be, or forward that email, please make sure it's true. Just take a minute or two to make sure it's true. The world needs truth and is starving for it. And if we are the ones who follow the truth, let us be the ones who provide it, not misinformation. We need to do better. Now, we're not alone in this. Certainly not alone in this. The rest of the culture is doing it plus. But they are not our teachers. They are not our teachers. Integrity. Third consequence, and this is the most dire, is that when we seek autonomy and sacrifice truth and clarity on the altar of autonomy, we lose all sense of accountability, which leads to a lack of a sense of human value. And this is insidious and ugly and happening in our day. You know, it was Protagoras, the philosopher, who said years ago, man is the measure of all things. You know, he said that there are no gods above us to dictate that which is right and wrong. Humanity is the pinnacle of creation. We are the ultimate reasoning beings, and so we are the ones who determine what's right, what's wrong, what's true, and what's false. Man is the measure of all things. We've been saying this ever since that. We just say it in more flowery, more unique, or intellectually sounding terms. Tom Flynn says it this way. Tom Flynn's a very thoughtful, secular humanist or atheistic writer. This is what he says. Listen to what he says. Secular humanism maintains that through a process of value inquiry informed by scientific and reflective thought, men and women can reach rough agreement concerning values, crafting ethical systems that deliver optimal results across a broad spectrum of circumstances. Men and women, through scientific and reflective thought, can come to a rough agreement concerning values, and then blah, blah, blah. That is a very fancy way of saying humanity is the measure of all things. It's the same exact sentence, just really, really intellectualized. We reach rough agreement concerning values. Have we reached this rough agreement concerning values yet? Where is this mythical thing at? I want you to think about this. So I have a machine in my pocket that we still call phones for some reason. Who makes calls on these things anymore? No one does. But this machine has more computing power in the machine in your pocket. The one machine in your pocket has more computing power than all the computers put together that sent the first rockets to the moon. That's the genius level with which we have, or the ingenuity we have right now. And despite all that ingenuity, have we reached a rough agreement concerning values? Ask anybody who's been on the sharp end of the stick of racism or sexism or the genocide that's happening around the world to Christians in the 21st century. Not the first century, the 21st century, just how rough that agreement actually is. Then you go to the university campuses, and sometimes a speaker has to speak in a room where there is no crowd, only a camera, which beams that message into another room where the crowd is, because the crowd is so violent, the speaker is at risk of his or her life. And you want to tell me we've reached a rough agreement concerning values? We have reached an agreement on one thing, not on a rough agreement concerning values, but on the value of being rough. That's where we are now. Because we're autonomous. And you can't come against me in any way, shape, or form. You can't disagree with me, because that's the ultimate affront. I'm offended, and those words are magical today. Because we're God's. Reminds me of the poem by Alexander Pope in Essays on Man. He says, "Go wiser thou, and in thy scale of sense, weigh thy opinion against providence. Call imperfection what thou fanciest such. Say here God gives too little and there too much. Destroy all creatures for thy sport or gust. Yet cry if man's unhappy, then God's unjust. If man alone engross not heaven's highest care, alone made perfect here, immortal there. Snatch from his hand the balance and the rod. Rejudge his justice, become the God of God. In pride, in reasoning pride, our error lies. All quit their spheres and rush to the skies. Pride is still aiming at the blessed abode. Men will be angels will be gods. Aspiring to be gods if angels fell. Aspiring to be angels, men rebel. And who but seeks to invert the laws of nature sins against the eternal cause. Rejudge his justice and become the God of God. Snatch from his hand the balance and the rod. That's exactly what we're doing today. And Pope wrote that, not the Pope, Alexander Pope, wrote that decades ago. But Yuval Harari, the secular humanist Jew, in his book Sapiens, runaway blockbuster book, read by millennials all over the world, this is what he says. He says, 70,000 years ago, Homo sapiens was still an insignificant animal minding its own business in a corner of Africa. In the following millennia, it transformed itself into the master of the entire planet and the terror of the ecosystem. Today, it stands on the verge of becoming a god, poised to acquire not only eternal youth, but also the divine abilities of creation and destruction. We are more powerful than ever before, but have very little idea of what to do with all that power. Worse still, humans seem to be more irresponsible than ever before. Self-made gods with only the laws of physics to keep us company. We are accountable to no one. We are consequently wreaking havoc on our fellow animals and the surrounding ecosystems, seeking a little more than our own comfort and amusement, yet never finding satisfaction. Listen to what he says now. Is there anything more dangerous than dissatisfied and irresponsible gods who don't know what they want? This is not a Christian talking. This is an atheist talking about what he sees today. So I talk about this machine, this little phone, which gives me access to so much information, and misinformation and disinformation as well. But we've never been more connected, yet more alone. Never been more obsessed with our downward device-dazzled gaze, as one author put it. You ever see these evolution charts or these little icons of evolution where it shows like a cell, a fish, a turtle, this other kind of creature that's walking up more and more upright until it gets to humanity, and suddenly we're upright, and now we're actually going the opposite way now. Now we're doing this. And we can become phone, there's a word for it, it's called phone zombie. People are walking in the fountains by accident because they can't stop looking at their phones. But what do we do with these phones? What do we do with them? We name them. Siri, Alexa, all these different things. If I say, hey Siri, and I say, play Britney Spears, someone's gonna play Britney Spears right now. You'd be embarrassed. But we give them names. We give them names. And then we think that somehow this information machine makes us autonomous and free. Really, let me ask you a question. And if for the younger crowd who's over there enjoying themselves, I'd ask this question as well. You ever in a situation where your phone dies and there's no charger around? Do you get a little twitchy? I mean, there's actually a phenomenon now where if your phone is sitting on a table, you'll feel it vibrating in your pocket. Like someone who's lost a limb feels that the limb's still tickling. That's how much our phones have become a part of us. And we're autonomous? Are you kidding? And this machine, which we've now given a name to, what do we do with it? We cyberbully people until they cry and feel alone. We hide ourselves in our rooms, only accompanied by the sort of cold blue light. Or we look at images of human beings who are now made into commodities for our baser gratifications. You see, friends, we've humanized objects that we now use to dehumanize people. And we think we're free? How do we break out of the cycle of the dehumanization, the lack of integrity, and the lack of wisdom? I think it's to return to the truth and to hope once again. Let me sustain that for you in the time we have. See, the culture rejects the Bible as an authority for freedom because it thinks that it is a freedom-killing book with freedom-killing rules that say, don't do this. Why? Because dusty people in a dusty time thought it was icky to do this and use God to justify their outrage over the ickiness as if it was just arbitrary. And so the Bible is this book of rules that forces you out of a life of pleasure and fulfillment, when exactly the opposite is true. Yes, the Bible does stand against autonomy. It does. And the reason it does is because autonomy, as I've said before, leads to unbridled chaos. But it does not stand against freedom. And so this is the difference, friends. Autonomy and freedom are not the same thing. Autonomy is when you're a law unto yourself. You can do, say, think, act, be whatever you want in whatever way you want, however you want, and you can force someone else to agree with you, and that leads to enslavement. But freedom has boundaries. It necessarily has to have boundaries. It was Chesterton who put it this way: even art, which we consider to be unlimited, even art has boundaries, he says. The essence of every picture, after all, is the frame. You might think to say to yourself that you have freedom to draw a giraffe with a short neck, only to find out that you don't have any freedom to draw a giraffe at all. Whenever you enter into the world of facts and reality, you are always entering into a world of limitations. If you try to draw a camel with no hump, you are finding that you have no freedom to draw a camel at all. You dare not free things from the inherent qualities, maybe incidental, but not the inherent qualities. You dare not free a tiger from his stripes, even if you try to free him from his bars. There's always a limitation. So, give you an illustration of what I mean by freedom, having just enough boundary. My wife and I, when we were looking to buy a house, back when our firstborn, I have 3 wonderful kids. My firstborn, my boy, wasn't even a year old yet. We're looking into this one house, and it has a big backyard. And the kind of yard you can see your kids playing and then just enjoying themselves. And which is the whole point of having a backyard. That's the purpose of the backyard, to enjoy its beauty and to see the kids running around like crazy back there. But here's the problem. The backyard backed up to a main road where cars and trucks, sometimes big, heavy, load-bearing trucks, were whizzing by at 45 miles an hour and all this. And so we said, we can't buy this house because if the kids play back here, they'll get pulverized because the ball will bounce into the street, and kids being kids, they'll chase after the ball, not look both ways, and get creamed. Unless we put up a boundary. Just one. You cannot play beyond this. You see, without the boundary, my kids would not have the freedom to enjoy the purpose of the backyard. But with the boundary, they had the freedom to enjoy the very purpose of the backyard. Boundaries don't kill freedom. Boundaries actually engender freedom. And the only restraint, as Os Guinness says, that doesn't inhibit freedom is self-restraint. We need that. And one of the restraints is the moral code, the moral law. We don't get to say what it is because we're not God. And there has to be someone above us to tell us what that freedom actually is and what those boundaries actually are, lest we turn around and eat each other. We've never been more free. Is that true? No, we've never been more enslaved to our own desires for freedom. And now we're eating each other alive as we speak. The Bible offers a sense of true freedom. Think of the passage in John chapter 8, verses 31 to 36. Most of you probably know this story by heart, and if you don't, you'll remember as soon as I say it. So Jesus said to the Jews who had believed him, they believed him, by the way, "If you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." Did you catch it? You will know the truth, not feel the truth. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Jesus couples truth and freedom together. They are inextricably linked. You cannot have one without the other. You can't have freedom without truth. The culture today says that your preferences will lead to freedom, really meaning autonomy, which leads to chaos. Jesus says, no, preferences don't do that. Truth leads to freedom. That's coupling number one. Their response to him is nothing short of hilarious. It's hilarious. He says, the truth will set you free. They answered him, we are offspring of Abraham and have never been enslaved to anyone. How is it you say you will become free? You're offspring of Abraham and have never been enslaved to anyone. Did you forget the 400-year bondage thing to Egypt? Offspring of Abraham, never enslaved to anyone. And by the way, they're saying this while under Roman occupation. How do you like that? The point of this is that your preferences and my preferences and our desire, our human desire for autonomy is so powerful, it blinds you to the facts you agree to. And then Jesus, of course, answers them without compromise, but with compassion. Truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not remain in the house forever. The Son remains forever. So if the Son sets you free, you'll be free indeed. Did you catch that one? You'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. The Son sets you free. If the truth sets you free and the Son sets you free, the Son is the truth. It's literally embodied in a person. Now, you can't just say that and just let it sit there. You got to back that kind of a claim up. I can't say I'm the truth that sets you free, and then you say, okay, sure. You've got to say, you write with demand. Why should I believe you? And they asked him that question in John chapter 2. Why should we believe you? What authority do you do these things by? And Jesus says, if you destroy this temple, meaning his body, I will raise it up again in 3 days. That was either true or false, and preferences had nothing to do with it. You see, he could have said, if you kill me, my teachings will live on, or I will rise spiritually in this ethereal way that Jehovah's Witnesses believe, which is non-falsifiable. It's just not a valid claim. It's a useless claim. But if he said, I will die bodily and I will rise bodily, that's a bold statement to make, because if it's false, we can verify its falsity. And if it's true, we can verify its truth. He was banking on this. He would not have made that kind of a claim if he didn't know he had the power to do it. And then I can tell you this, I've debated many an atheist or a Muslim on this. You can look at my debates on YouTube and you'll find out the evidence for the historical Christian faith that Jesus rose from the dead as a matter of history, not just hope, but as a matter of actual history that backs up the hope. The evidence is amazingly powerful. It's one of the reasons I became a Christian in the first place. And it's through that hope that we have a future we can look forward to. I'll give you the global hope and then the personal hope, and then we'll close. First is the global hope. At a missions conference, you have to think about the global hope. But that global hope applies globally. It doesn't just apply over there. It applies here too. Listen to the words of Matthew Paris, an atheist, by the way, who wrote an article called Why Africa Needs Christianity. He's an atheist, and he wrote this article. Now, this is interesting all by itself when you think about this. Not just an atheist wrote it, but that he wrote that Africa needs Christianity. And one of the reasons is because he began to see something happening in the lives of people touched by Christians. You know, Mark Twain is credited with saying the following, history does not repeat, but it does rhyme. And the idea there is that things aren't always the same, but they're pretty close. And it was Christians who were ministering to non-Christians in the early days of the church under the Roman Empire rule, and they're willing to die for their beliefs and serve the sick and injured among the pagans. The very persecutors they were suffering under, they served them so much so that Emperor Julian said, the insipid Galileans are winning the hearts and minds of the people because they don't only serve their own kind, they serve ours as well. And then the plague ships were teetering off the coasts, and it was Christians who went onto those ships and ministered to the sick, getting plagued themselves. And then we find Christians going into Western Africa, Ebola-infested West Africa, getting Ebola themselves in order to help those who are sick. History does not repeat, but it does rhyme. Are we perfect? Far from it. But have we used the impetus of Christ who gives his all for everyone to make the world a better place? Yeah. There's a reason there's so many hospitals in the world. that are based on religion, and not so many Our Lady of the Blessed Nothingness hospitals. Matthew Paris says this: "Before Christmas, I returned after 45 years to the country that as a boy I knew as Nyasaland. Today it's Malawi. It inspired me, renewing my flagging faith in development charities. But traveling in Malawi refreshed another belief too, one I've been trying to banish all my life, but an observation I've been unable to avoid since my African childhood. It confounds my beliefs, stubbornly refuses to fit my worldview, and has embarrassed my growing belief that there is no God. Now a confirmed atheist, I've become convinced of the enormous contribution Christian evangelism makes in Africa, sharply distinct from the work of secular NGOs, government projects, and international aid efforts. These alone will not do. Education and training alone will not do. In Africa, Christianity changes people's hearts. The rebirth is real. The change is good." Global hope. So much so that someone who denies God's existence says that this is the very God who offers the hope. Whether it's Matthew Paris or Marcello Pera, the atheist philosopher, former Italian senator, who says that we need Christianity. The very ideas of liberté, égalité, fraternité, liberty, freedom, brotherhood, and equality. He says these are not words of the French Revolution. Those words came late. They're based on the old booklet, he calls it, the Gospels. Global hope, but then there's very personal hope as well. Very personal hope. Let me give you one illustration, and then I will bring it to an end, because a young man at Yale University came up to the microphone and asked me a question. He said, "I heard you talking about freedom and how truth leads to freedom. But can you tell me, how does Jesus do that? I'm not putting that together. How does Jesus factor into all this?" And then he asked this question: "And does the resurrection have anything to do with it?" What a question. So this young man, bright guy at Yale University, this is what I answered him, essentially. I answered him this: "The Bible tells me that you and I are both made in God's image. That is a specifically, uniquely Judeo-Christian thing to say. No other worldview, whether atheistic or theistic, would have told you that you're made in God's image. Now, why do I believe that you're not just a flotsam and jetsam, or a cosmic accident, or a bit of cosmic pollution, as one scientist put it, or a meat computer, as one atheist said, or a sophisticated chimp, as Darwin might say? How do I know you're not that? Why do I believe the Bible when the Bible says you're made in God's image? Because Jesus made that claim as well. And then he said that because you're so valuably made, sacredly made in God's image, you were meant to have relationship with God, but each one of us has strayed from that relationship with God, wanting our own autonomy rather than his authority. And because of that, we've incurred a debt to God. And Jesus, who has no debts of his own to pay, says, I will pay your debt for you by dying on a cross. Now, if he died and stayed dead, there's no reason to believe him. But if he rose from the dead, there's every reason to believe him, because guys who rise from the dead have credibility. And I said to him, he said, you bear God's image. And he died and rose again to prove he was right. That gives you purpose. And your purpose is relationship with the divine. You see, my friends, freedom is not the ability to do what you want, whenever you want, in whatever way you want, or even to be what you want. Freedom is the ability to do what you want based on what you should, in accordance with what you are. When all three are put together, that's when you know what it means to be human. That's freedom, young man, I told him. This is a world careening out of control in so many ways because we don't understand each other. We use our preferences to bludgeon one another over the head. Whether someone has, same-sex attractions, or they have gender dysphoria, or they have a political viewpoint different than ours, we start to bludgeon each other over the head with these things and engage in this roiling dispute all the time, not understanding each other. Jesus says, I understand you through and through. I'm the one who understands you because I'm the one who made you. And if we could just see a little clearer in that respect, maybe we could disagree disagree sharply, but still disagree agreeably and see each other. And then we point out the truth of what Jesus offers in a winsome and beautiful way, not in a seemingly judgmental way. Reminds me of Thomas Bracken's poem, Not Understood, where he says, not understood, we move along asunder. Our paths grow wider as the seasons creep. Along the years, we marvel and we wonder why life is life, and then we fall asleep. Not understood. Not understood. How many lonely hearts are aching for lack of sympathy, day by day. How many cheerless hearts are breaking. How many noble spirits pass away. Not understood. And then he says, oh God, that men would see a little clearer, or just judge less harshly when they cannot see. Oh God, that men would draw a little nearer to one another. Perhaps they draw nearer to thee and then be understood. We're giving way to our preferences, and it's leading to chaos. 2,000 years ago, Jesus says he was the way, the truth, and the life that leads to our fulfillment. He's the truth that sets us free, but we've been trying to set ourselves free with things that are neither personal nor true, all the while seeking personal truths. The secular band, Canadian band, Crash Parallel, puts it this way in their song Rain Delays. Sleepless nights and endless days, and mini skirts and serving trays, waking up from rain delays, selling sex for pocket change, and living off the alcohol with no one but a cab to call, lost inside a bathroom stall, this carbon copy life withdrawal. And then they say this, but I need someone to believe in, someone to fill this space with grace, to look into my eyes and touch my face, someone to make me strong, someone to make me belong, someone to make me alive. Secular band, recognizing that experiences, preferences, career, drugs, whatever it is, will not fulfill you. They'll only make you cry. Someone can, and the someone who can is the only one who's perfect, and the only one who's perfect is Jesus. So in a world that's looking for fulfillment in personal truths, finding only lies and deceit, let us offer them Christ, in whom the truth is a person, the Son through the fog. God bless you. Thank you.